Brian Windhorst, welcome to OutKick. I don't think you've been on our platform before.
That is possibly and probably true. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I want to give a little backstage news. As people can tell, I have a suit jacket on. You
Yes.
don't. You want to
That's,
explain the dress code?
you know, I wasn't sure, the truth is I'm doing my podcast right after this. And
Okay.
like, there's this belief that like podcasts should be casual. And I'm not sure why, like I didn't ask questions. That's like on podcasts, why is it that we have this microphone and these earphones? Why do we do this? Like, I use the same seat for television. And when I do television, by the way, the podcast will be on television and YouTube too. I don't know why I'm saying that. I use this lav mic, and then I will use like an earpiece so that you can't see. And then this mic will be gone. So why, when it's like when it's not like formal linear television, do we flip over to this informal thing? For some reason, people like it.
Yeah.
So I could have
Uh,
worn regular television, and I feel a little intimidated that you are wearing a jacket and I am not. And I considered like pretending I had to go to the bathroom and then coming back in a suit, but I decided I wouldn't disrespect you that way and just give you credit for showing up at a higher dress code.
so, news to everybody. When I was a senior in high school, you had to predict everybody in your class, and there were certain awards, and I won three, most likely to be TV, best hair, and best dress. Now, the TV one I can't beat you on. You're on TV all the time. You actually have a pretty good haircut. I'm not gonna lie.
Thank you.
When you look at male haircuts in media on TV, you're right up there. Now, the buzz cut was cool, but this new one, I'll admit, it's pretty good. So I figure the one way I can get you is not update you on the dress code, right? You're hanging out with your buddies and you want to be the best dressed guy at the bar. You don't tell them, hey, let's wear cat
Fair point.
suit jackets.
Touche.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Brian,
Touche.
I appreciate you coming on. This might be a bit of a shock to people, but I'm actually a big fan of your work. I know there is some reputation among your former colleagues, Bill Simmons, Ryan Russillo, that I'm an anti-NBA guy. So I'm going to put that to rest right here. But I think what's going on right now with this gambling scandal is the most fascinating sports story in a
Yeah.
long time, not just because of what we've learned so far, but the ramifications to come. Do you think this story is even in the fifth inning? How much further are we going to go, and how much more are we going to learn?
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I wish I could say I know exactly, and here's my reporting and everything. A year ago, when Jontay Porter pled guilty, he got a relatively light sentence for what he could have gotten, and there was an understanding that he was going to cooperate. That whole thing was adjudicated very quickly, from the time when he was investigated to the time when he was caught. He did it. We think twice. I don't work for integrity services, but the evidence shows that he did this on two occasions. The first time was flagged. The second time he was shut down. Within a short period of time, he was banned by the NBA. I think even before there were federal charges, and then there were federal charges, and then he pled out fast. Within a very quick period of time relative to federal cases, it was taken care of. I don't think he's been sentenced yet. And I think that's key, that he hasn't been sentenced yet. And the fact that he pled and that these indictments came before his sentencing is probably relevant. I'm not a prosecutor. I've talked to prosecutors about this. But there were, I think, in the Porter case, there were 5 people charged. And in these cases, there were 34 people charged. That is not an accident. And so the question now becomes, is there going to be a third round where there will be even more people charged, or does this stop here? There was a lot of people in this indictment. A lot of charges went out. I talked to a federal prosecutor on my podcast, and I hate doing that. I hate referring to other podcasts. So excuse me for that. But one of the things that she said, she had been in the Southern District of New York. Well, this is the Eastern District of New York, but she had been in charge of wire fraud prosecutions in the Southern District of New York. And she had just left that office earlier this year. And she felt, not necessarily the facts of the case. If the facts of the case can be proven, they will be found guilty. I don't think that's in question. Not the facts of the case, but she felt the charge of wire fraud against some of the people in the NBA section of the case was a bit of a stretching of the statute, which would imply that maybe they would give them that charge and try to get them to potentially plead out of it. Or she said more than plead would be participate, help the federal government. And she said that there is a long history, particularly in New York, of when the prosecutor says that you help out in the prosecution, that your sentence is usually dramatically affected. She said there was a long history of that. So that with this many people indicted, it does set the stage for potential further. So that's what I can say. The experts that I've talked to in my reading of the indictments, which I think reading the indictment is important. I'm not sure how many journalists actually read the indictment. As one of the things, like on the day of, I spent an hour like not touching my phone, even though there was like this demand for a reaction. I was like, let me read the indictments. So the answer is maybe. The answer is maybe. I don't think the NBA side of these cases are particularly dramatic relative to the other side, where there's millions and millions of dollars and mafia and beating people up and stuff like that. I think the NBA side of the case is a little bit less fascinating, but that doesn't mean that these guys who are involved here couldn't roll over on others, and there could be more.
Do you get the sense from talking to teams and GMs that they are concerned that some of their players could come up in this at a later date?
It's a good question. I think the reaction was they couldn't believe that Chauncey Billups came up in this. And there's two distinctions, I think, in this particular case that should be pointed out. And again, I'm a basketball reporter who talks to people. I am not a lawyer. There were two indictments, as we all know, one indictment involving poker and one indictment involving the leaking of insider information about player availability. In the poker case, the victims were these people who were defrauded and taken of money. And the reason that is a worry to the federal government is that millions of dollars were given to what they say was the mafia, and that this is the defrauding of these people out of millions of dollars is funding mafia operations. That's why they wanted to shut that down. They weren't necessarily feeling bad for these stool pigeons who came into these games to play with people they thought were cool and were defrauded. They were worried about this being a pipeline of money to be used for nefarious purposes. In the case of the NBA case, the victims were the sportsbooks, which they are reasonable businesses too, but one is different than the other in the sphere of public opinion. So there's distinction between the two cases and the two victims. The other thing is that in the NBA case, Damon Jones was charged with selling inside information, literally telling people a player was or was not going to play on multiple different occasions and receiving money back for it, straight selling it, which is why he was indicted. Chauncey Billups was indicted for his actions in the poker case, which the government said was drawing people in by being a celebrity name to draw people in. In the NBA case, he was accused of leaking information, but not outright selling it. and he was not indicted in that case. He was listed as an unindicted unnamed co-conspirator. The reason we know is because the way they describe him in the indictment, it could only be Chauncey Billups. So there's a distinction between the two cases and a distinction between what Damon Jones and Chauncey Billups are accused of. So the reaction from the people in the NBA was, what did Chauncey know, and when did he know it? Was Chauncey acting nefariously, or did Chauncey say something that ended up turning nefarious? And that's where the people want to know, because intent is important here. The fact that he was unindicted, there could be 10 reasons why he was not indicted for that. But there's a lot of people in the NBA who might be guilty of leaking out information that you're not supposed to leak out. Not all of it was done in nefarious terms. But the point is, if they can pinpoint that somebody said, hey, superstar player X ain't playing tonight, and they can tie that back to a text message, and you just told it to tell your buddy, and then it's found out that your buddy went and spent, put down 50 grand on that. That's where I think the concern is. The concern is that if they keep going, that they can pull text messages and stuff. Like, look, if there's somebody legitimately, getting on the phone with a gambler and saying, hey, put 100 G's on us tonight or put 100 G's on the opponent tonight because our star's not playing. As if I told you, hey, I just got out of practice and star Z is not playing tonight, and then you putting down $50,000, there's a distinction there, and that distinction is apparently in this case, we think. And one is an active thing and one is passive. But if you're federally liable on both, that's where I think there's concern in the NBA, and that's why I think the fallout from this, when all the dust settles and the indictments stop, is that the NBA is going to have to really ratchet down how it handles injury reporting, because it's a strategy thing, and they sort of try to keep it close to the vest for street strategy reasons, and they just are not going to get away with that anymore. And you may be saying to yourself, well, how come Brian is not saying anything about those guys leaving games betting on the unders? That's in the indictment too. But in that case, Jontay Porter had already pled guilty to it. And Terry Rozier, it was publicly known that he was under investigation for this. There was no new information about those guys being involved in this. The new information was that the federal government found enough to indict Terry Rozier, which leaves the NBA with egg on its face, because their investigation did not find provable wrongdoing. But those incidences were not quote unquote new. Those were, people in the NBA were aware of them, and they're aware of that situation. Nobody was aware of Damon Jones and Chauncey Billups.
So one of the points you make is that the victims in the one case were the sports books. But here's what I think people are missing, and where I find this hypocritical and even suspicious. I don't know how familiar or how much you follow in-game betting or even spreads before the game. But it's notorious that if a player, let's say Luka Doncic, is 50-50 to play and the Lakers are favored, that would indicate he's going to play. Well, sometimes we'll see an hour before the game statuses that the Lakers are all of a sudden underdogs and Luka isn't playing. And this happens in all sports. I know last year when Patrick Mahomes had a high ankle sprain in a game on Saturday against the Texans, all week the Chiefs were underdogs. Then that Thursday they jumped up to favorites, and we found out a few hours later Mahomes was going to play. Doesn't that indicate the sports books also have inside information?
It could, and they could be adjusting it based on the bets that they're getting. If they know
Right.
that that they have certain bettors who they may react to. Yeah, I mean, so the way I've described it, and I've talked about this for years, not dogmatically and whistleblower, but I've mentioned this for years. So let's just take an average. Today is Tuesday. Let's take an average Tuesday in the NBA. Let's say tonight Charlotte is playing at New Orleans. Okay, LaMelo Ball has been ruled out of tonight's game. I don't know when you're going to publish this, but this is known. What I'm saying here is not unknown. LaMelo Ball is an ankle injury. Okay. The Hornets or the Pelicans have I'm sorry. The Hornets, Pelicans, I confused myself. The Charlotte Hornets have a shoot around in the morning. And at this shoot around, there's maybe 40 people there. The bowl is closed in New Orleans. It's sealed off. The game's in New Orleans. But how many people are in that building, Bobby? There's all the players, 15 of them, 17 if you've got your two-way guys there. There's 8 or 9 assistant coaches. There's trainers. There's security personnel. There's support staff. There's somewhere between 40 and 50 people in that gym who watch shoot around. And maybe they're looking at shoot around and they see LaMelo Ball ain't out there. In fact, maybe they see LaMelo over on totally in street clothes, doesn't do anything. And it's obvious to everybody there, LaMelo ain't playing. He got up in the morning and they put their back up. He goes through the game plan. Well, for decades in the NBA, they would routinely, and this still happens today, they would say LaMelo Ball is questionable, or they would say he's a game time decision. And all those 50 people walk out of that gym knowing LaMelo ain't playing, or a very high likelihood LaMelo ain't playing. And maybe some of them, over the course of years, know somebody and they go, hey, LaMelo ain't playing in this game. Because this is an example. I have no idea how this game will play out.
Right.
The Hornets are the Pelicans are 0-6. Like whether LaMelo plays in this game or not is very relevant to the outcome of this game. Okay. Yeah. So maybe somebody says to a better friend, LaMelo ain't playing. And the guy's like, okay. And he goes and gets a bet down, right? Yeah. Maybe a guy's talking to a friend of his, and I was like, yeah, I just got out of shoot around. Yeah, LaMelo looks terrible. He can barely walk. He ain't playing. Mm-hmm. Okay, he's just violated NBA rules. And NBA players are educated that this is against the rules on multiple occasions. But it happens. There's 50 people, right? And some of those 50 people are earning tens of millions of dollars per year. And some of them are earning less than 100,000, okay? Because that's what happens. And so that's where the NBA has been susceptible and soft. In football, it's a little bit different. The injury, you can sometimes kind of tell as the week goes on, look, if the guy didn't practice on Friday, they can call him questionable or doubtful or whatever. But if the guy didn't practice, you can kind of, or Saturday. In the NBA, for decades, this has been a soft spot. And so this is exactly what Chauncey Billups was accused of. In that case, Damian Lillard, they decided that they were shutting Dame down for the rest of the season. They were going to tank. They were trying to get, I can't remember. I remember if it was Victor Wembanyama, but they were going to tank. They were going to tank for the last 10 games or 12. By the way, they lost 15 of the last 17. The tank worked, and they were literally shutting Dame down. Dame was listed as questionable, and then he got switched to doubtful, and then he got switched to out. But they had already known. Not only did they know when they moved him to doubtful, Bobby, they knew as an organization he wasn't playing the rest of the season. They knew the next 9 games he was out. So, yeah, they changed the thing, but he wasn't doubtful. He wasn't doubtful for the rest of the year. And so that's the thing. That's where the NBA has to tighten it up. So in this case today, LaMelo goes through shoot around and they say he is out. Okay? There isn't 50 people that have information that the rest of the world doesn't. The whole world knows LaMelo is out. But for decades, you don't want the other team to know your star player is out. So you say game time decision.
Exactly.
Now, a lot of times, it is a game time decision. Maybe LaMelo goes through shoot around and he sort of labors through it. And they're like, okay, we're going to ice through the day and he'll take some more Advil and pregame. We'll see it. So like the teams could look at you and say, well, it was game time and you can't prove them differently. But that soft spot is where there can be a problem. And so prop bets where they're susceptible. By the way, prop bets aren't just susceptible to a player pulling himself out of a game. They're susceptible to anything to keep that guy out of a game. They're susceptible to a referee deciding to call fouls on him. They're susceptible to a coach. There's a lot of different ways that prop bets are dangerous too. Prop bets are dangerous, but player availability in basketball where there's 5 players, the quarterback is somewhat comparable because the quarterback is such a vital part. And if you downgrade from a star starter to an average backup, it's a huge difference. The starting pitcher in baseball is comparable, but in both cases, they only play half of the game. And in baseball, starting pitcher might throw 7 scoreless innings to get a no decision. So that is what has to be adjusted. The NBA has got to come down like a ton of bricks to minimize. They'll never 100% get rid of it because it's human nature, because there's still going to be people that have some information, but that what you're describing is they have some inside information. That's got to be closed down. Not just for integrity purposes, not just, so that the bettors, but just for the integrity of the game. And I think that'll be one of the outcomes of this, is that you will see a different level of the way the NBA handles those exact situations.
I mean, when you talk about the future of prop bets, because I know I did some podcast and radio hits last week, and people would ask, I don't know, I think somebody said, maybe it was Stephen A. had mentioned the future of prop bets. There's no way those go away, right? Because there's so much money. And I feel like you have a lot of conflicting interest here, right? The teams don't want to be all that transparent on the injury report because it's a competitive advantage, and that goes for all sports. I think that's what the Ravens were trying to do in the NFL a couple of weeks ago, say Lamar Jackson was questionable because that makes the other team prepare for him as well as the backup quarterback. The leagues are in business with the sports books, and the sports books, they're not going to want to limit prop bets and all the other in-game betting. So I don't know what the conclusion here is, right? I mean, other than Congress getting involved, it's hard to imagine all that much changing.
I agree. I think it is very complicated, and I don't think there's an easy answer. And, there could be limiting of prop bets, limits on the bets on them. I'm actually, just in general, and not being an expert on the betting markets, but my concern has always been college guys as opposed to NFL guys, because college teams don't have injury reports. Right? Like,
yeah.
And there's nobody policing them. And the other thing about NBA guys, and this is one of the things about Jontay Porter, Jontay obviously made a series of bad decisions, but he decided to get in bed with gamblers when he was actually getting playing time. And he did that because he owed money. Like he wasn't just in a vacuum. He had gotten in trouble, which is why, players being allowed to gamble at all is, it's a free country. If you're following the law, you're following the law, but it's problematic because, one of the things you hear in the Chauncey Billups situation is his lawyer even said this, something, to the effect of, this is not exact quote, why would he do this? He has so much to lose. Well, if you're the federal government, what you want to find out is, did Chauncey Billups owe a lot of money in this poker game, or other places? Because that's where it could be susceptible. And that's where you worry about college players, because so many college players have nothing to lose. Especially players in mid-majors, where maybe they started their careers at high Division I's and they transferred down, or maybe they started their careers thinking they would play 1 or 2 years at a mid-major and then transfer up. Now they get to their junior, senior year and they realize, I'm not going to be a first-round draft pick or a second-round draft pick, but there's people offering me money. That's my concern, has always been that. In fact, there was a budding, before I covered the NBA, I covered the Mid-American Conference, which is sort of your neck of the woods. In the 2000s, there was a budding scandal involving players in the Mid-American Conference, specifically the University of Toledo, involving a guy who went to be in the NFL, Bruce Gradkowski, and then a number of basketball players. And this is a classic example. This is a mid-major school. And the FBI, I think, had gotten a number of some players were shut down for seasons, and I think they had agreed to be cooperating witnesses for a guy who was running a gambling ring out of Detroit. And the guy, before it ever went to indictment and trial, the guy got sick and died of cancer. And I'll always wonder what would have happened if that federal investigation ever went out. But I mean, I remember really ever since then being concerned about that being, a soft target. And now that, gambling is so proliferated and gambling on college sports is so proliferated, I would be more concerned about the college athletes because so many of them don't have anything to lose. A lot of the NBA guys have a lot to lose. And in some ways, that's sort of the firewall, because, for example, Terry Rozier was earning $240,000 a game when he was accused of this. He's earning even more than that now. I mean, now he's not. His salary is being held in escrow. But, and that makes you wonder, like, why would he do this? And so someday he'll have to probably answer that question in some form. It's a problem because the prop bets are what drives, just this weekend, the Barstool guys, two of the Barstool guys, if we're to believe everything, I have no doubt, but they made a parlay with prop bets and two of them hit for over six figures. And I watched the footage of the moment in which they hit the last of the, I don't know all the details. And I enjoyed it. I took in the moment and they hugged each other, and it was actually incredible theater celebrating that they had hit this prop. I mean, that's what you're selling. If you're a sports book, you're selling that you could bet $200 on something. And if you hit enough things, you could win six figures. I mean, it's a genuine reaction, but that's also an advertisement for why these prop bets are so attractive, because you would have people who would love to have that experience. And, it's the same concept as when you walk into a casino and you see people standing in front of this, photos of people who hit the $1 million slot machine. And they're, if they're 70-year-old women from the Midwest, all the better, because there's a lot of 70-year-old women from the Midwest coming in. You want to see, like, that person won, why can't I? And so, like, that's built, that kind of moment is built on prop bets. So I agree. I don't have an easy answer for this. And I do think part of what we're going through right now, what the NBA is dealing with in real time, is how to adjust to the new normal, where sports books are interwoven into the way that so many people consume the league and the way the league generates new revenue.
Switching gears a little bit here. Everybody knows you, at least in the sports world, as the NBA guy. You started your career in Cleveland, write podcasts, do a bunch of TV, have fancy hair, have a couple of your own memes, all that. But I don't think they know too much about Brian Windhorst, the guy. What are your interests other than basketball?
My interest right now is youth sports, because my 7-year-old son is every weekend is in youth sports, 5 or 6 days a week. But I am a fan of pro golf. I watch as much as I can of pro golf. I have a couple of I won't call them friends. We don't hang out every day, but I have a couple of pro golfers who I'm acquaintances with, who I specifically keep really close tabs on and really pull for them, and pay a lot of attention to, the game. One of my favorite events is the Ryder Cup. And, there's really only two things I truly care about, which is, one is Ohio State football.
Oh, okay.
And two is, the Ryder Cup. So it's been a mixed bag year. Ohio State won the national championship, and the Ryder Cup was yet again another disaster. But I really get into it. And when when you work in the sports field, you're not really fanatical about it. My really get into it is not like a lot of people's. But I'm into that. And I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and so I live this kind of duality life where I'll spend a week in Los Angeles and I'll be going to multiple NBA games, and I'm in the studio, and, I'm fully engaged. And, when I walk from the studio over to the arena, I may get stopped 4 or 5 times for photos. If I'm in New York City, I'll walk 6 blocks, 5 or 6 people will say something to me, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. Usually people are nice. I come back to Omaha, and the NBA is just not a thing here. I mean, obviously, there's obviously fans, but I'll move through Omaha, all over the city, maybe 4 or 5 times a month. Somebody will say something to me. I get, more in New York City or, the Atlanta airport in 10 minutes than I would get in Omaha in a month. And so it's one of the things I like about it. Major college basketball is played in Nebraska. Creighton is in Omaha, and they've routinely got high draft picks. They've had first round draft picks the last 2 years. In fact, actually, I think this last year they had second round pick. Was he first round pick? Second round? Anyway, and scouts come through here all the time, and they also go to University of Nebraska, which is 45 minutes down the road, to see Big Ten games. And Bobby, like when the scouts come in, like when I used to live in New York City, when people come into New York, they know 500 people in basketball in town. When they come into Omaha, they know like nobody. And so they call me. And so I am always really happy when Creighton has a draftable player because the scouts all come. There was a restaurant in Omaha. It unfortunately closed after the pandemic, but it was a breakfast place. And over the years I've lived here, I probably took 10 NBA general managers into that restaurant for breakfast, because a lot of the Big East games are played at noon or 1 o'clock, and so they would fly in the morning, and we'd eat before the game, and nobody ever says anything. Nobody ever says anything. Like I'm bringing through like a routine. Just since the summer, there's been like I've hung out in Omaha with 5 or 6 different NBA executives, and nobody has any idea. Nobody has any idea. So it is kind of an interesting back and forth that I live, but I like it. So I sort of live this life where, especially in the playoffs, I might be like, at all these games, with Stephen A, doing First Take, on site, with Malik Andrews and, Kendrick Perkins doing the shows and, going around cities and all that stuff. And then I come home and I don't even think my neighbors have any idea that there's this studio in my house that I'm a lot of times doing live national television now. They just have no idea. And so that's kind of the life that I live.
I mean, I'm, as assume you aware, so similar. I think I live in an area far smaller than Omaha. I think people think what I do is very goofy. Maybe it is. I hang out with a lot of truck drivers, farmers.
Exactly.
And I think it keeps me grounded because I never get too high or low what anybody online says about me, because the people in my real life, they don't care either way. They don't know who that person is, whether they're complimenting me or criticizing me. So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, you walk right off of Fox News and then you're outside like picking up your laundry, and like the Fox News might even have been on there.
Yeah.
Right.
100%. I mean, look, especially the online stuff. I mean, TV, especially in this area, pretty Fox News heavy demographic, but as far as online, they don't even know what X is. Most of them, they're still on Facebook and trying to figure out why their MySpace password isn't working. So I live 2 different lives there, much like you.
Yeah, there's a Dave and Buster's. You know what Dave and Buster's is? You have those.
Huh?
So
Yeah.
I remember a few months ago, I took my son to Dave and Buster's, and I had done TV earlier that day, and we were inside of Dave and Buster's, and there was and I know every hour of the day there's 500,000 television screens on ESPN and no one's actually watching. I get that, but like literally, Dave and Buster's is these enormous screens, like 12 feet wide by 6 feet high, like multiple of them, and I'm on these screens in Dave and Buster's. Nothing. Nobody says anything. So it is. I can relate to that as well.
Does your wife get excited to see you on TV? Or is she just like,
No, that went away a long time ago. When's it over so that I can give you the chores?
Well, Brian, one more. I really enjoy you coming on. So hypothetically, say you are forced tomorrow morning to pull an Adrian Wojnarowski, like I said his name right, leave sports media altogether. what are you doing with your life? Are you retiring? Are you going to be a GM of a high school, a college? Are you farming and out in Omaha? What's next? Or
You
not
know,
what's next? What would be next?
yeah. So one of the things that I think is important is to admit what you don't know. Like, I know that as someone who's labeled as an insider, it's not, you can't say I don't know a lot, but
Yeah.
sometimes you just don't know. Like, like you say to me, like, what will there be more indictments in this gambling? I don't know. I think there are signs that point to that it could be, but I don't know. I don't know enough about basketball to evaluate players. I don't know enough about basketball to say I'm going to go coach. I don't know enough about basketball to say I'm going to go pick guys to be on my son's team in second grade, much less for anything relevant. I really like aviation. I'm very very interested in aviation. When I'm not, I spend pretty much all day on the phone with people all over the world talking basketball so that I can get information and understand information, digest information. All day long, I consume videos and articles and social media posts to try to process it. But late at night, when it's all over, I watch vloggers who travel. Okay. I'm really into the aviation community. So I don't think I'm smart enough to be a pilot because you have to like know all kinds of things, but I would work in aviation. That would be my thing. I am sort of an expert in the aviation industry because I take 100 something flights a year. I travel internationally, a handful of times a year. I am really attuned to different airlines, different ways to travel within things, different ways to get from different places. I help a lot of people in my life, like, hey, I'm going over to Europe and I want to be able to get in and get out in a certain way, or I'd like to fly business class. I can say, okay, well, if you do A, B, and C, maybe that'll work out. So probably that's what in my quote unquote off time. I am watching people who like travel and do vlogs. That's all my algorithm on YouTube. When I pull up my YouTube app, it's all like basketball plays and like and stuff and replays from like 2017 when I'm going up and looking old stuff, and then it's aviation vlogs. That's my algorithm.
If you had to guess, what do you think my algorithm is mostly made up of?
Hmm. Good. I like this. This
Yeah.
this this could be a whole show.
Uh,
Um. Hmm. Man, I'd like to come up with a really witty answer, but I prefer to just sit here and think about it for 5 minutes and then do it.
okay. Uh,
Um. Definitely not sports.
yeah, not sports. Very, very little.
Um. I do feel like you watch a reasonable amount of TV though,
Huh. No TV
because
shows.
yeah, but I feel like you'd be watching stuff that was on TV.
Yeah, I get, well, for example, whenever The Sopranos has its anniversary for its final show, I put out a tweet. So I do see some Sopranos memes. I'll be honest, it's probably not the most exciting stuff. It's a lot of history, World War post,
Which World War II, World War One?
World War II,
Yeah.
some stuff about Russia. I guess because I like and stories, updates on that. Let's see, a lot of history. I think the internet thinks I'm a history buff. Um, Believe it or not, a lot of travel stuff too. Like check out this city, check out that city, hotels. So I think it'd be a bit surprising. I'm not exactly
U.S. travel or international travel?
U.S. travel. U.S.
Okay.
travel, which I think I've asked you for tips before on different cities. So I think the internet would be a bit surprised. I'm still not exactly sure the perception of me is accurate, but so I always like to ask people what they think the internet thinks I'm
That's
interested.
actually, I think this is a good concept. What's on your like look right
Yeah,
now, I'm
yeah.
gonna call up my YouTube app and I'm gonna tell you what comes up.
I'll check mine too.
Yeah. I got there's a pilot vlogger that I follow from United Airlines, and it just says canceled in Paris.
Mhm.
A Stephen Curry mind your game with LeBron and Steve Nash episode. It just said another thing that apparently Stranded is popular. Another travel vlogger, it says Stranded. I flew America's most bizarre airline. That's what it says. Near midair collision in Cleveland, my hometown. That was really exciting. An interview with Dante DiVincenzo from the Timberwolves. Yeah, I stand by it. I would right now, if I had nothing to do, I got to do my podcast in 15 minutes. I would watch every single one of those videos.
Well,
Mind the game one probably a little long. I probably can't fit that in.
yeah, I don't want to put any pressure on anybody to react. So I'll just say I also checked my YouTube, and there were a lot of political jokes on there. So you can decide maybe which jokes.
Well, it's election day today.
It's election day. Yeah. Brian, I want to get you out of here on this. I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit on some of the people I talk to. I talk to a lot of executives, agents, talents, more than I'd want to. And what I want to give you a shout out for is that there are very, very few people in this industry that have good reputations. I think that's what's made Michael Wilbon so unique, is that everyone respects him. You're one of the only people I can say that your bosses, your colleagues, rival agents, other talents at different networks rave about. And I think that is a tribute to you and how you've handled yourself. So I just want to know, what does that mean to you that is your reputation?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's something I work really hard in doing. I want to be a uniter. Sometimes it's not being divisive sometimes can be bad in the business. Sometimes people, they want divisive. I'm not really a guy who looks for division. I'm like a uniter. In fact, my podcast, which is called The Hoop Collective, do you like that little pitch in there? Yeah. The reason I called it that, to be honest with you, was that when at one time at ESPN, they were using like 7 or 8 different people to do NBA podcasts. And they kind of decided, we're not going to do 7 or 8 anymore. We're only going to do 1. And mine got the best number, so they decided to have me. But I didn't want those people to just not do podcasting anymore. So I wanted all of them to still come on the podcast. So I called it Collective because I wanted it to be everybody. That's just indicative of how I try to operate. I listened probably 15 or 20 years ago, maybe not 20, but there was an interview that Jimmy Iovine did, the music producer. He did it on Howard Stern. And, Jimmy Iovine, he's worked with I'm sure there's other producers who have it even more impressive, but you look at who he's worked with and it's Bruce Springsteen, John Lennon, Tom Petty, Dr. Dre, it's this incredible list of people. And even he would say, I'm not really that talented, as a producer. But one of the things that he talked about was always he used the word being of service. He always wanted to be useful and be value added. And I already kind of felt that. But I remember hearing that interview and thinking, that is what I want. I always want to be looked at as a valued member. Even if my role is not that big, even if I only do something small. But if I'm in a group, whether I'm in the group with Stephen A., Mike Greenberg, Scott Van Pelt, who's ever at the finals, I want to be, even if I just have, even if I just pinch hit and lay down a sacrifice, that's, my thing. And if I'm, where I'm leading a podcast group where my voice is the lead voice and my name's on top of the podcast and I have a bigger role, I want all those people, even if I just need someone to come down and lay down a sacrifice or whatever, set a screen, whatever metaphor. And that's important. And here's the truth, Bobby. Here's the thing. I'm not 6'7". I'd like that. That was another look. That was for my son. 6'7".
How tall are you?
5'11", 5'10", probably. I'm 47. I might have shrunk a little bit. I'm not very good looking. I'm not I don't have any specific, I'm not an incredible writer. I don't have a great voice. There's nothing about me that is going to, when I walk in a room, command the room. I figured that out a long time ago. And I could say that, you give it the old hard work, well, at a place like ESPN or anybody in high level media, everybody who's working in there works hard or has worked hard to get there. Like there may be an occasional outlier, but just saying hard work's going to get you there isn't necessarily true. At ESPN, the ethos of the company is hard work. If you don't work hard at ESPN, you will stick out. Okay. Even the people who are, not hard workers by terms would be considered overachievers in other fields. So I wouldn't just say hard work, but I want to be of service. I want to be value added. Whatever my contribution is, I want to be there, and I want to be there. I always want to be there. I'm never going to be late. I'm always going to be prepared. I try to always be value add of service, like I said over and over. And so that has been my pathway forward. I will never come into the door riding the white stallion. I will always be the guy who's just, when everybody else fell apart and wasn't around or couldn't deliver, that's what I did. So you don't advance if you're not a superstar talent, you don't advance without being super prepared, on time, always adding value. And so that's just part of that is you want to be appreciated. You don't want to be the guy who they don't want you around. You want to be the guy who is always someone like, hey, we need more of him. He always comes through. And so that's been a focus of mine throughout my career at ESPN, because what I always tell people when they come to ESPN, if they ask me, when people come to ESPN, sometimes they come to me and I say to them, okay, you've gotten hired at ESPN. Congratulations. For a lot of people, it's a goal. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people, it's a goal. The hard part is just beginning, because being successful at ESPN is harder than getting to ESPN. It's for 100 different reasons, and everybody's journey is different. And I could go on about this for an hour. And people thrive for different reasons. My ability to have a 15-year run and hopefully longer is based on what I want to be, the guy that everybody wants to work with and everybody knows will deliver when I'm called on, whether I'm called on for 10 seconds or 10 hours. And so I appreciate people saying that. It means what I've done has not gone unnoticed, and I'm going to keep doing it.
Brian Windhorst, thank you.
Thanks, Bobby.